storms.
I'm Craig Lamolt. Tonight on Greater Boston, DEP Commissioner Bonnie Heupel joins me ahead of Earth Day to discuss the state's new efforts to target pollution in low-income neighborhoods, plans to fight climate change in Massachusetts, and how the state is looking to prioritize environmental justice. Plus, performer Gabe Malika on Solo, a show about friendship, playing now in Boston through Sunday. People in Massachusetts' low-income and majority Black and Latino communities are exposed to much higher levels of pollution than the rest of the state. And that leads to higher rates of heart disease, asthma, and other respiratory diseases. That's why state officials are taking steps to toughen rules on power plants and other industrial operations in those neighborhoods. The commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, Bonnie Heupel, is leading that push and a number of other climate initiatives, and she joins me now just a few days before Earth Day. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So as I said, we know that these communities, these environmental justice communities, bear a disproportionate burden when it comes to pollution. New regulations in the state are requiring a new kind of analysis on the environmental and health conditions before you give permits out for these kinds of pollution. Can you speak to what is the impact of that? What difference is that going to make?
This is going to make a huge difference. So this is a really nation-leading effort by Massachusetts. We're now the first state to require this type of really science-based cumulative impact analysis for air quality permits in or near environmental justice populations.
It's kind of stunning that it doesn't actually already happen.
You're right. So this is actually, in large part, the result of work that we've done over years, working with community groups, hearing from residents, that when we as an agency are presented with application for an air quality permit, that we consider that application in the real world context. What exists in that community? We already have really bad air quality here. How could you allow something new like this? So it gives us that ability in a really defined and scientifically based manner to consider that real world impact in a hyper-local fashion.
How will that work, and what impact could that actually have?
So the program has really two main elements. The first is this cumulative impact analysis.
Right.
So this is a requirement on a would-be air permit applicant, so before they even become an applicant, before they get to us, to conduct a comprehensive analysis of the potential impacts that a new facility or an expanded facility could have on air quality in that community. We've developed a lot of tools and resources that focus on health and environmental indicators, again, in a really local fashion to give people the basis to conduct that analysis. And that's figured into our evaluation of their air permit application. I'll just say the other key piece is engagement. So it's increased requirements that someone who would like to create this kind of facility or expand this kind of facility provide useful information to residents. And from our end, featuring things like public meetings, longer public comment periods to give folks really meaningful opportunities to engage before the permit application even comes to us.
I'm thinking about some of the recent sort of controversial projects, the Weymouth natural gas compressor, the East Boston substation, more recently the Peabody Peaker plant. Will this have any impact on existing projects, or it's just for new projects or ones that are expanding?
This is a forward-looking requirement. So if a facility wants to expand, one that already exists, if it wants to expand in a way that will meaningfully increase its air pollutants, they would have to come to us, with this request and this type of analysis already conducted and already in hand. Okay.
Can you address the Peabody Peaker plant at all? Are there any issues there? Things where that stands right now? It's not open yet.
It's not open yet. Approved many years ago, before my time, before this administration. Yeah. So certainly having the types of tools that these types of innovative requirements will give us a better basis to really comprehensively evaluate things like that as they come to our desks.
For future projects
like this. For future projects,
okay.
Correct.
What about landfills and waste incinerators, projects like that? Will this have an impact on those kinds of projects? And do you anticipate maybe seeing fewer of those in the future?
So any facility that needs an air permit, this would apply to. So things like incinerators, this would apply to. We have, in Massachusetts, we have a set number of landfills and incinerators right now. We don't, have any applications to have new facilities of that nature. And as an agency, what we're trying to do is really be forward-looking and forward-thinking there as well in terms of conserving our existing landfill space. So it's pretty limited. We're almost at capacity in a lot of the landfills that exist right now. So recently, another big update we've made is to roll out waste bans. So things that really don't belong in the trash, diverting those materials for reuse, for recycling, for composting, to conserve that landfill space so that we're not having to think about new facilities.
Years ago, I did a story about the ash landfill in Saugus. It's ash from a waste incinerator. A lot of people in the community very concerned about the impact of that. Still operating, as I understand it. Any thoughts about that project, and could that potentially see a closure at some point?
So that facility has a closure based on its elevation above sea level, not to get too in the weeds, but based on how high the ash basically is piled within the existing facility. It is located in an area of critical environmental concern, which means that we would not permit an expansion of that facility. So they have their limit. When they reach that limit, the facility will shut down.
Okay, but not before then.
Unless they make a business decision to do that, right?
Okay. One thing I wanted to ask you about, a persistent problem in terms of water quality in this state, is combined sewer overflows, right? We know that billions of gallons of untreated or partially treated sewage is going into our waterways every year. Because of stormwater. The combined system, it overflows, it goes into the water. It's very expensive, I understand, to fix that, to separate out those pipes. I saw a place in Alewife in Cambridge recently where that is happening, where when there's significant rain, that the waste goes into the water. I'm wondering if there's anything more that the state and the DEP can be doing to try to separate out those pipes, to stop this problem that we hear about just so frequently when these overflows happen. Yeah,
well, part of the reason you hear about this problem so frequently is because we actually recently, in the last couple of years, put in place notification requirements. So before those requirements, there was a big concern, and rightfully so, that people weren't aware. When there was a big storm, there was a suspicion, and in many cases a correct one, that these types of overflows were occurring, but people really didn't have the data at their fingertips to know whether that was the case. And that's meaningful, right? That means, is that a day that you go swimming? Is that a day that you make choices around how you're spending your time around water bodies? So we put in place notification requirements that are largely being complied with right now, which is a great thing in terms of information sharing. It has made folks much more aware. So that's why we're, hearing and seeing a lot more about it right now. A lot of work has been done in the past to address CSOs, these overflows. And really a lot of progress has been made. The last couple of areas where this continues to be a problem are really complex in terms of what watersheds feed into those areas and the existing infrastructure. So certainly DEP has a role to play there. We're coordinating with other agencies that also have a role to play there, and also exploring every opportunity for federal funding. These are really expensive problems to address in these remaining areas where this is a concern. So calling upon all of those bipartisan infrastructure law funding opportunities, working with our partners at EPA to figure out how we can solve those last couple once and for all.
So in the end, it does come down to money, right? This is just a very expensive problem.
It's a very expensive problem to solve. There are things that we can do in the interim that we are doing. As an agency, we have out for public comment right now proposed regulations that would manage a lot more of that stormwater on site. So rather than having it all, get conveyed somewhere else through big pipes, through this gray infrastructure, really promoting the use of green infrastructure. Things like vegetated areas, rain gardens, to absorb and filter a lot of that stormwater as it falls from the sky,
Right.
as it collects,
Right.
as opposed to just, funneling it all
Right
to
into
one
the
place.
system. Okay. Another major concern for water, of course, is PFAS, right? There's been a lot of talk, a lot of discussion about this recently. In Massachusetts has been bound to 115 drinking water systems, at least, I think. And I know the federal government recently came out with some new regulations limiting PFAS, in certain types of PFAS, rather, in drinking water. Massachusetts already had some regulations. How are the federal regulations and the Massachusetts regulations combining? Are they protecting us? And does more need to happen to limit the impact of PFAS?
Yeah, these are often, as you know, referred to as the forever chemicals, right? They're so persistent, they're pervasive, they're everywhere at this point. And these are things that actually serve some really useful purposes in our everyday lives right now. I mean, the raincoat that I wore today, that I bought, 10 years ago, that I wore to the studio today, deflects rain conveniently because it has Gore-Tex in it, which has PFAS in it. Yeah. It's on lots of nonstick coatings. So finding substitutions for those types of applications that we all really enjoy is certainly, kind of a business side challenge that people are contending with right now. On the regulatory front, as you point out, Massachusetts really was one of the first on this. So we set a standard for PFAS in drinking water back in 2020, just in recognition of the fact this is a huge issue. These can have some really serious health implications, cancer and non-cancer health implications. And we couldn't wait for a federal standard to be set. So we set our standard for 6 of the PFAS chemicals at 20 parts per trillion. And there's lots of calculations that are behind that. We also, in recognition of the fact that in 2020 the science was still evolving, our decision at that point was grounded in science, but each day we get new data, new detection technologies. We imposed on ourselves in Massachusetts a 3-year look back.
Yeah.
In 3 years, we're going to take stock of where we are today. Does the 20 parts per trillion make sense? Should we adjust that? Should we include other PFAS chemicals that we now are able to detect? So that work is underway right now, and thankfully coincided with EPA finalizing its standard. So we're at 20 parts per trillion for 6 PFAS chemicals. EPA is at 4 parts per trillion for 6 other PFAS chemicals.
Okay.
So some of them overlap and some don't. So that just came out in the last 10 days or so. We're digesting that information right now. We will do something at least as stringent in Massachusetts as the federal standard, but we have some time to do that.
Okay. While we're talking about toxic chemicals here, the EPA released its toxic release inventory recently. 369 Massachusetts facilities released about 3.7 million pounds of toxic chemicals into the air and the land and the water. I know the state also keeps track of this through the Toxic Use Reduction Act. These are permitted releases of this toxic material, and it raised the question for me as I was reading about this, about whether or not the permits for these are too broad. Are we allowing too much toxic material to be released into our atmosphere? Is there anything that we can do about that? Do you see this as a problem?
I see it certainly as an area where we need to strike the right balance. So as with many things, the fact that we still as a society produce waste, the fact that we still rely on fossil fuels to some extent, not all of these changes can happen overnight. I think the Toxic Use Reduction Act program has been really successful in dramatically reducing the use of these chemicals and really improving the handling of them when they are used. But I think we're not there yet on a lot of these fronts. And any technological innovation we are cheering on. We certainly in Massachusetts are trying to really create that kind of hub for innovation here, both on climate tech and on a lot of these technological fronts, because unless and until we have good substitutions for those chemicals and these substances and these energy generation sources, we're going to continue to use things that are, a threat to climate, a threat to the public health, a threat to the environment when they are, used at certain levels. So in the interim, our job is to promote really good planning, really responsible handling, and really responsible disposal of chemicals like that.
Okay. What about food waste? I know the state is working on reducing it from companies, from commercial interests, but I participate in a food waste program in Boston. It's a pilot program. Is there more that the DEP can be doing to encourage more food waste, reuse, composting, anaerobic digestion, that kind of thing?
Absolutely. So I mentioned earlier, we really do have this limited landfill space, which sounds like a thing that only environmental regulators and waste companies, think about, but really is an issue that impacts us all, right? We all produce waste. Conserving that capacity, this food waste ban that we've implemented is a big part of that. So late last year, we rolled out new bans for just materials that really don't belong in landfills. So this is things like mattresses that are almost 90% recyclable.
Right.
When you cut apart a mattress, there's springs and foam and wood and other things that can be used in other applications. Textiles, that's something that we're really trying to spread the word about. Your old bag of t-shirts that you've been looking to donate, that's been knocking around in the trunk for a while, making sure that materials like that can be broken down and reused, or in some cases donated and reused in their original fashion, right? Just you're not wearing it, someone else can. But are really harmful in landfills. They take up a lot of space, they soak up other materials, really, really not what we want to see in our landfills. And then the third component of those bans was increasing our food waste ban threshold. So it used to be these really large sort of manufacturing facilities that produced over 1 ton of food waste per week, and now it's half a ton of food waste per week.
Right.
So that brings in things like universities, large restaurants, and requires them, not just encourages them, requires them to do food donation, composting, any other of many options than throwing that food in the trash.
What about residentially, though?
Residentially, I belong to the same program, it sounds like you do, which is terrific. Yeah. We are cheering those programs along. I mean, that is such a key piece of this, is making it easy for people, right? Particularly people in areas that we don't have the space to have a backyard compost pile like we do in other regions of the state. So we're taking a hard look at, what we can do as a state to cheer along these programs, encourage them, and where they're already working, use those as models for other communities to adopt similar programs.
Okay. Recycling. I want to ask you about recycling. There is an effort in the legislature, it's in committee right now, to expand the state's bottle bill to include more bottles, including water bottles, wine bottles, nips, things like that, and also to increase the deposit amount from 5 cents to 10 cents. How do you feel about that effort? Would you support expanding the state's bottle bill?
I know a lot of efforts have been made on that front in the past. We've certainly been supportive. We also, as an agency, as we kind of track these bills and provide input where appropriate, are looking to just expand awareness. I think there's a lot of misinformation about recycling out there now. Why even bother if it gets dumped in the landfill anyway? And the types of individual actions we all take with respect to recycling really determine that outcome. So we don't see a lot of, the YouTube video type of suggestions that just they're dumping the blue bin in with the trash. We don't see a lot of that. We see recycling not being recycled when it's contaminated. So when you're putting things in your recycling bin that cannot be recycled. And that really is an individual action, right? We all stand over the bin and say, oh, I'm just not sure about this. Part of that is that recycling technology has changed so much. So now, this is my PSA to everyone, you can do the pizza box. You don't have to do this rule of thumb about, 25% grease covered or what have you. You can recycle the pizza box. That's a great example of where the recycling technology has improved in recent years. We have a really great tool called the Recyclopedia.
I was going to plug that. I use that all the time because it's a question.
It's terrific.
Which one does this go in?
Right.
Just Google Recyclopedia. It's a Massachusetts site and it answers my questions every time.
It's at your fingertips. It's meant to be really easy. It resolves lots of, roommate and marital disputes over can the yogurt container go or not. But you can literally plug in anything you're holding and it tells you just a yes or a no and what to do with it if it's not recyclable. So that helps a lot in terms of not contaminating the load, and then things truly are recycled and put back in through the system.
Super useful tool. I use it all the time. In just the minute we have left, I want to ask about electric vehicles. We have goals in this state, 300,000 electric vehicles on the road by the end of the next year, banning out, phasing out gas-powered vehicles sales by 2035. It seems like we're not on track to that. Is there more that the state and the DEP can do to encourage more electric vehicles and charging?
Absolutely, and we have to. So transportation is about 40% of our emissions profile here in Massachusetts. You know, it's not large industry, it's not large manufacturing. It's really how we get from point A to point B and how we heat and cool and light our homes. So on that transportation front, electrifying and again, making it easy for people to do so. So as people are making that decision about their next vehicle or, you know, changing course, making those incentives that we offer as a state easy for them to access and making sure that we have charging in their neighborhood, you know, available to them in some way that fits in with their daily life. That's the only way this can work. So there's actually a coordinating council focused on this right now. So making the charging infrastructure make sense, and also making sure that people are able to access those incentives when they're looking to buy a new or used EV.
Okay. Commissioner Roddy Heupel, thank you so much.
Sure.
Happy Earth Day to you. I hope
Happy Earth Week.
You have a good one.
Thank you.
Much. Take care. Next, sometimes breaking up with a friend is even more painful than with a romantic partner. Something performer Gabe Malika learned the hard way. He shares the heartbreak and humor of love, betrayal, and trying to make friends in your 30s in his one-man show, Solo, which I had the pleasure of seeing ahead of its opening night in Boston. Gabe Malika joined me yesterday to discuss. You begin the show by talking about realizing when you were in your 30s, you didn't have any friends. You had bros,
yeah,
but not friends. Explain the difference.
Yeah, so bros in my life are kind of just like guys we watch movies, we play sports, we play video games together, but we don't really know anything about each other. The big moment in the show is that my mother asks me, your friend Nick, his sister had a baby. How does he feel about being an uncle? And I was like, I have no idea how Nick feels about anything.
Right, right.
You know, we don't have that type of relationship. It's all shoulder to shoulder as opposed to face to face.
But this is someone you spend a lot of time with, but you don't, you know, yeah.
By all accounts, my best friend in the world. And I was like, wait, do I not know anything about him? And that question sort of lingers throughout the show. It's like, how well do you know your friends?
Yeah, it made me think a lot about my own friendships, and I've been very lucky. You know, I have a strong group of friends. But most of them are from college or from high school. The people since then are mostly friends through work. It is hard to make friends as an adult. That's something you actually talk about in the show. I think we have a clip of that.
I go to parties. I try to meet guys. It's hard to meet guys because I'm judgmental. You know, I'll go to a party and I'll meet a guy and he's like, hey, I work in tech. And I'm like, well, we had a good run.
I love that. What is it that makes it so hard to make friends as an adult?
Yeah, I mean, when you're in high school and college, like, it's community-based, it's about making friends, it's part of your socialization, and at a certain point, it just kind of gets cut out, right? We try to meet romantic partners, there's apps for that, but then there's like apps for making friends, and I'm like, who is this for? Like, I don't want to be a part of that, and it's just, it's a difficult thing, and it's something that I've been able to connect with a lot of people doing the show so much. People come up to me all the time, oh my God, I feel this way too.
Yeah, it hasn't always been the case that you didn't have friends. You did have a close friend in college named Tim. What was different about that friendship?
Yeah, it was just one of those friendships where, and I think we all can relate to this in some way, in college, we'd just spend all our time together.
Right.
We'd stay up really late in a classroom, debating, arguing, watching YouTube videos, riffing. And we got really close when we started working at a Paul Newman camp together for children with illnesses. Mm-hmm. And when you do something like that, it's a pretty sacred activity. Like, those kids are really special. And you bond in this sort of way that's beyond, oh, we're having beers late at night.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we're connecting in this new way. And yeah, for a long time, like, I would have said, this guy's my best friend. We're super, super close. We live together. We spend all our time together. And then we sort of had a falling out, and that's sort of the basis of the show.
Right. It becomes about that friendship and the loss of that friendship. I hope I'm not revealing too much to say that, you know, a little love triangle situation.
Yeah.
He winds up getting together with your girlfriend.
Yeah.
And that ends the friendship and the romantic relationship. Which of those two was harder to lose, the romantic relationship or that friendship that you had with Tim?
Yeah, I mean, everyone at the time was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry about you and the girlfriend. And for me, it was like, oh, like, I'll meet another romantic partner. It was this friendship that felt so stark. And I will add, too, that I am not against love. Like, if people I love each other, I'm like, that's great.
Yeah.
It's sort of like how it happened is sort of like the crux of
a betrayal of you and of that friendship.
Yes, but in a way where it wasn't like, hey, this thing accidentally just happened. We didn't mean for it to happen. I want to make sure you're okay. Are you okay with this? Like, that I could deal with. It was kind of like, hey, the two of us are dating. We're not sorry. Get over it. And that is the kind of the ultimate betrayal, which is I'm doing this thing and I don't feel bad about it.
Yeah. Was it that part that was it unforgivable? That not that it happened, but how it was addressed?
Unforgivable is such a strong word.
Yeah.
I always like to think that I'm a pretty open person, and that if somebody came to me and was like, man, I feel bad about this, I'm sorry you had a tough time with that I'd be open to that. And, you know, the show was turned into an episode of This American Life, and this is a big theme that's on that episode.
I wanted to ask you about that because This American Life producer they don't just run a clip of your show. You wrote a one-man show about this.
Yeah.
That's what I saw. But then This American Life didn't just run a clip of it. They actually invited Tim to come and see the show and then interviewed you and him about it after. He hadn't seen the show. What was that like for you, and how has that changed how you feel about what happened? And also, what has it done for your career? I mean, that was a pretty big audience suddenly.
Yeah, it was an intense thing. I feel like a lot of artists make albums and secretly are like, oh, Adele wrote this song about so-and-so or whatever. Now, can you imagine Adele performing that whole album to that person and then talking about it afterwards? Like, it's an intense thing to kind of go through. Credit to Tim for showing up and doing it. Like, he did not have to at all. He could have definitely stayed home. But yeah, it's an intense thing to kind of like share your art about somebody to that person and hope that they like it. And if you listen to the episode of This American Life, like, he's not unkind about it, but I wouldn't say he's like, man, this is great, congrats.
No, he's. I would say he was unkind. That's
sure.
I wanted to ask lastly about just the emotional, taxing nature of doing this show. You're very vulnerable on stage. You're telling a lot of things that are difficult to talk about. You've been doing the show for what, 5 years now?
Yeah.
That must be just emotionally exhausting.
Yeah, it's emotionally exhausting, but afterwards, and you saw this last night, I sit and chat with people afterwards. Like, the show is a dialogue. I really try to eliminate the fourth wall. People talk to me, they send me DMs. It is communicative. And so I want people to feel like they know me and that they can relate to me in different ways. And like, last night's conversation will probably be different from tonight's conversations with the audience. And so that's really important to me. So it's taxing, yes, but I feel like it's my job as a comedian and as a storyteller to be really vulnerable, and then people can reflect that in whatever way works for them.
One thing I don't think emphasize enough is how hilarious the show actually is.
Thank you.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for coming on to talk with us a little bit more about it.
My pleasure. This was so fun.
Gabe Malika, thanks for being here. You can catch Solo, a show about friendship, at the Huntington Theater's Calderwood Pavilion now through this Sunday, April 21st. For tickets and more info, head to bostontheaterscene.com. That's theater with an R-E. That's it for tonight, but come back tomorrow for Talking Politics. Our State House reporter Katie Lannon will talk to GBH News transportation reporter Bob C. about the state of the MBTA and his recent conversation with General Manager Philip Eng. Plus, a new report finds ShotSpotter gunshot detectors get it wrong more often than not. That and more tomorrow at 7. Thanks for watching. Good night.